Juliana back on top.
What a terrific moment for Barry Schultz. World title number 2.
And there it is.
Hello everyone, I'm Brian Earhart, and today, on behalf of the Disc Golf Network, we present to you a long-form interview with three-time disc golf world champion Nate Doss. Doss invited us to join him at his business, Bevel Brewing in Bend, Oregon, to talk about his long and storied journey in the sport of disc golf. Enjoy. What I'm interested in is for you to paint me a picture of growing up in Santa Cruz in late 80s, early 90s, when Ken Climo was talking to me about coming over to California for the first time. He told me how blown away he was at the disc golf community, and that was, I believe, early 90s is when he started doing that. So from your perspective, growing up in Santa Cruz, paint me that picture. What was it like?
Well, for me, my oldest memory, I cannot go back and have a memory that doesn't have disc golf involved. So my oldest memory is the very first day that I ever went to DeLaveaga. And it's a little fuzzy because I was 6 years old and all that. But the reason we ended up going up there was because my family had just moved back to Santa Cruz. My mom actually took a job in the Bay Area, but we ended up coming back to Santa Cruz, and my dad had found out about disc golf. And he found it on like a local access channel. Steady Ed was on there, and I think Tom Schott or something like that. So we go up there, and my dad is just obsessed with it. And my mom says, you better be taking Nathan up there to wear him out. You know, I was a little 6-year-old kid running around going crazy. And the very first day, Marty Hafner actually gave me a disc. It was a rock, and we still have it. It was my very first disc that I was ever given. But at that time, it was a dirt parking lot. There was just a small group of people. There was only Marty showing up on Saturdays to sell discs that he would get, through knowing some people down in Innova, and he would get like a box every other month or something like that. And so it was, the disc golf scene was just super underground, but for this one weekend a year, and that was the Masters Cup. And that was what every Santa Cruz disc golfer lived for. When the pros would show up and, Climo would come into town, or Scott Stokely would come into town, John Earhart, all these different players would come into town, but the prep would start in February, March. We'd start mowing. In those days, the tournament was in April. And so we just would mow, and the grass was thick, but it was all hands on deck. And so it was just it was a family. We all got to know each other, Marty, Tom, everybody that was in that scene, and it was just 3 days. It was 3 days. It was in those days it was a pro-am, and you would play one round a day for 3 days, but they would run 2 rounds on the course. Mm-hmm. So pros would play in the morning, AMs are in the afternoon, then they'd flip, and then the tournament would finish, and then of course you had the final 9. And the final 9 was like the memory of all memories, because that was the best players in the tournament. Everybody in the tournament got to watch them. So, Santa Cruz is a very special place, minus just the disc golf. If you just look at the town and the people and the ocean and just kind of the way things are. But once you go up that hill and you go up into DeLaveaga, to me, it's one of the most unique communities in the country from a disc golf perspective. I've been fortunate to see basically all of them, but this is a very unique subset. And I think in a way, it does still exist. In fact, not too long ago, I went back to Santa Cruz. I hadn't been there in a while. And I'm driving up the hill, and it was Val and I, and thinking, man, I can't wait to play hole 1. I'm just thinking about hole 1, and as soon as I get towards a parking lot, I see this guy standing just to the right of the road. There's a bench there, classic bench, 27's baskets on the left, and I look at it, and it's Tony Tran. Tony Tran is still at the course at 11:30 on a Wednesday, practicing, putting, still throwing shots up the hill. And I think that's the community part of it. There's something that's going to stay. As long as those baskets and tees still exist, that's going to always exist.
Talk to me about your relationship with your dad playing disc golf. I heard a couple things. I heard if you misbehaved in school, you'd have to go do some work at a disc golf shop. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my dad jumped in both feet. You know, I was 6 years old. So, you know, you're just getting toted along. You know, there's no, when you're 6 years old, you don't decide, this is what I'm going to do. And, you know, you just kind of are doing what you're doing. So I was absolutely obsessed with it, but it was because he was. He started playing tournaments right away. He signed up. I think he played the Fault Line was one of his first tournaments. And he just got into the scene. He got to know Marty. He got to know this person. He got to know that person. And all of a sudden, my dad's the one selling discs at the course. And that might have just been on the weekends. We had this old wooden station wagon. And we would go up there on Saturday morning at 7 a.m. We'd set up some tables. I would go play some holes, you know, just to, you know, and then guys would start showing up and then we'd get rounds going. I would play 2-3 rounds a day on a Saturday while my dad's selling discs. And so that was just kind of what we did. Eventually my dad would pack up and he would play some, but I would have guys paying me to go into the barrancas to find their discs, climb trees, you know, all that stuff. But my dad, the reason I was doing all that was because my dad was there. There was going to be no chance that I was going to be able to do that without him there. And so that was very, very important. Then Steady Ed and DGA kind of comes into the fold. DGA is down in Watsonville, California, not too far away from Santa Cruz, about half hour-ish. And Steady Ed would come to DeLaveaga every once in a while. And you get to know my dad and this and that. And long story short, my dad starts to work for DGA. So he's like working in the factory, whether you're drilling pipe or, you know, putting baskets together, shipping and receiving kind of stuff. And I was an okay student. When I actually became a much better student when I was older, when I got into high school and basketball became a part of my life and all these things. But when I was in middle school and a junior high, I was lashing out. You know, we had some crazy family stuff going on and, you know, just life happens. And I would get suspended from school. Not proud of that fact, but looking back on it, I'm thankful. Because I got suspended for 5 days. Okay, that's a long time. Your principal's like, yeah, we don't want you to come to school for 5 days. So my mom's like, has to go to work. She was a nurse. Mark, you're taking Nathan with you down to DGA. So I'd go down there and Steady Ed would say, okay, here's your job for the day. And it was, we have the pipe for the basket, they would get in these long lengths, like 20-foot lengths. And there would be like 50 of them. And they'd all have writing on the pole that would say made in USA or made in Mexico or whatever it was. And Ed's like, we cannot have that writing. We have to remove that paint. So, okay, here, you're 11 years old. I'm going to put these gloves on you. I'm going to glop this like crazy chemical. And he's like, here, and he trained me how to do it. And then I just did that the whole day. And he said, Nathan, before you leave, I want you to come to my office. So I go to his office. Hey, thanks for the help today. Didn't say anything about me getting suspended, by the way. He didn't seem to have a problem with that part of it. But he would say, here's how I'm going to pay you. You get to pick one disc out of this huge stack. And they were all cool old discs from early DGA days. And those days they had like numbered discs where it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Midnight Flyers and stuff.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. And he's like, you get to pick one for every day you work here. And so I'd pick like a number 3 Midnight Flyer. Or, you know, he might say, hey, you know, you should take this one. And then the next day I'd come back, then I was drilling all the holes. Ed had invented a sweet, like, and he made it himself. 3 drills that was on like a press, and it drilled the holes perfectly on the pole for the cross bolt and the set screw. And so I just sat one day and just drilled those holes all day long, 3 per pole, right? Whether it was an in the ground or a temporary whatever, 3 per hole, or 3 per pole, 3 holes at once. I did that one day. The next day I was like packing baskets. So I just did everything and anything I could down there, and those were some great days. Getting to work at DGA, getting to know Steady Ed, And, those are things I'll never forget.
Talk about your relationship with Steady Ed. What was he like as a person? We hear so many legends about Steady Ed, but you had a personal relationship with him when you were a kid. What was he like?
Yeah, Steady Ed is truly legendary. He's I think of all the people that I've met in the sport, which is effectively everybody, besides just a few, there's nobody like Steady Ed. He was so confident. He was so sort of demanding in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of times he rubbed people the wrong way. But when it came to kids, he was so supportive of everything. He always wanted to teach me how to do something. He had a funny thing, and the old schools know what I'm talking about, where he would factor discs. So he would take like a Cobra, and he put it, again, he's an inventor. He invented this cool thing where he'd put a disc, and it was like a spinning plate, and he had these blades that he would go in, and he would turn a Cobra into a Factor 2 Cobra by cutting some of the plastic off the bottom and turn it into like more of a Stingray flight or more of a, a little bit less stable. So he would take like a Whippet and do that to it. So now it made it less stable. These are in the days when there wasn't that many molds, right? It was, there was probably like 20 of them. So he taught me how to factor discs, which was, arguably illegal to play with them, but, Ed kind of, he didn't really care about that stuff. So he was always trying to teach me stuff. And he wasn't the best disc golfer at all, but he was a great inventor and a person that, at Bevel, we have a tank that has his name on it. And I have it on there because without the invention of the basket, and I'm not saying somebody else wouldn't have invented it, but without that invention, I don't think any of us are sitting here today. And he was so driven on turning a game of throwing frisbees at light poles and trees and things into a sport. That was the goal of the disc golf basket. And it did, because it gave you a way to say, this is definitively in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It would be like if on a golf hole you just had to ping off a little cup instead of going into the ground, and it has to be in there to be done. And that's what the basket did. And so, I was always thankful for that. But Steady Ed, again, was always supportive of me. And he could see the potential. And so Steady Ed was my first sponsor, actually. DGA was my very first sponsor. And they didn't really make discs, but he did factor some discs for me. And he had a cool hot stamp machine, and he let me hot stamp my name and my PDGA number on my putters and stuff. And he says, my dad was working for DGA. He said, we're going out to the Am Worlds. Your dad's going to come with to work the Fly Mart. And I want you to come. I want you to come and play. And I'm going to pay for your flight. And I'm going to pay for your entry fee. And I'm going to put you up in the hotel and everything. And so that was my very first opportunity. That was Appleton, Wisconsin. That was 1998. That was the Am Worlds. I was 13 years old, and I finished in 7th place. It was actually where I first met Terry Miller. There's a funny story with Terry where we were actually in a mini putting contest. And we tied, and we had to go into a playoff. Fun story with Terry. A 13-year-old Nate Doss mini putting against Terry Miller in a hotel, lobby kind of thing. But Steady Ed took me to that, and he gave me my opportunity to play against other kids that were good from all over the country. That's where I met the Girthies for the first time. And we stayed all together. It was my dad, Steady Ed, and me, all in the same hotel room. And yeah, it was amazing. And he gave me that first opportunity, and then things from there started to move forward. But without Steady Ed, like I said, none of us are sitting here, and for me, it was my very first sponsor, so I'll always be thankful.
So I want to ask about how you got to these Junior World Championships. Yes, Steady Ed got you there. He paid for the hotel. Mm-hmm. That's an incredible mentor to have. I mean, it's the mentor to have.
Absolutely.
And you spent all your days as a kid out there at DeLaveaga playing multiple rounds a day. You worked at DGA. Disc golf was your entire life so quick.
Yes.
You went from, I believe, 7th place at that Junior Worlds. I think Keith Warren from Wisconsin was the champion.
Left-handed player.
Legend from Wisconsin. Next year, 1999, you win.
Yes.
And it seems like at that point, you caught the tournament bug and you were playing a lot of disc golf tournaments. Can you talk about kind of your rise as a junior player and how actually competitive you were versus just having maybe the game be a part of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, Steady Ed gave me that opportunity to play outside of California. I mean, at that point, the Bay Area. You know, I played DeLaveaga. I had played in Aquatic Park in Berkeley. I played Napa, and maybe one other course, maybe like in Orangevale or something, maybe Grass Valley. Let's just say I played 5 courses. He took me out there, all of a sudden, wow, now I'm getting that. I did pretty well. I made what they called the semis, and you know, okay, so I'm pretty good. I will say this, the Masters Cup was always a big driver in the competition of me, because from the first year that we found the game, which was 1992, you see the Masters Cup everywhere and every year, and you're seeing Climo, and you're seeing Listman, you're seeing a young Steve Rico, you're seeing a Barry Schultz coming in, you're seeing all of that, and you want to be that. The most energy that I would feel as a kid was the moment the final 9 was over. I grabbed my bag, I went over to the first, because the course was closed for 3 days, couldn't play. I would go to the first tee, they'd be doing the awards, I'd be up playing, because I'm just thinking about, this is how Climo putted, this is how this, and that's where the competitive side started to come in, because you saw how good they were, and you saw, I think you also, I mean, as a kid, I saw the love that they got, and the trophy and all that too, you know? So that really started to come in. When Ed took me to that Worlds, that was the one and only opportunity that was going to happen. The next year, I actually, and this is kind of a cool story, my dad forced me to write a sponsorship letter. And I wrote it out, hey, my name's Nathan Doss, and I did this and this, and I want to go to the World Championships in Kansas City, Missouri. And I had to go, I went to like 50 businesses. And door to door, and I handed them out. And a lot of the businesses were like disc golfer businesses, but some were just like, you know, Ace Hardware. Pizza shops. Or you know, Orchard Supply Hardware in Santa Cruz. Yeah, pizza shops, a Cafe Pergolesi. Those guys were disc golfers, so they gave me $100. And it was like $100, $50, $20. Marty Hapner gave me $100. And it was, I actually raised like $1,500.
Wow.
Yeah, and because I had to raise enough money to fly me, my dad, and get a rental car and a hotel and all that. Like, I had to pay for it. And so I went through that whole process of, and that also was like, now I have something to play for. I need to prove that my sponsorship was valuable. And I showed up at that Worlds just ready to be a pro. I mean, I was wearing collared shirts with an undershirt. It's in Kansas City in August. My dad's like, you're nuts. I'm like, no, the undershirt looks good. It looks good, you know? And so it's just, and luckily, I dominated in that tournament. I think I ended up winning by like 25 or 26, something like that. And so I got all that glory of becoming a world champion at a very young age. And kind of side story, running up to that Worlds, I was playing some local events in, at the time, what was called AM2, and I was winning all of them. So I was playing in the advanced or amateur division with men and winning them by a handful of shots. Like, I played in Stockton, and I played in this place and that place. I think I won like 2 or 3 in a row. And I always wanted to play pro from when I was 10 years old. But my dad said, look, I'm the one paying for this stuff. Like, you're not playing pro, we're not losing money. You need to win some tournaments to prove it. I win Worlds, become the junior world champion. The very next day, in my mind, I turned pro. I turned pro and I said, I'm not looking back. And actually the junior world championships was the last, one of the last amateur tournaments that I ever competed in. I ended up playing a couple weekends later, I played in Auburn as a pro, took like dead last. You know, I'm 14 or 15 at the time. No, 14. And fast forward, the Masters Cup of 2000, I played my very last amateur tournament, won the advanced division, and then the next weekend, that was when they split it up, I took cash for the first time. So that's kind of the progression of my competitive playing. And in the early days, it was just either you were, there was really not a lot of casual players. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like you got in the scene and everybody competed. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's kind of how it all happened.
You had a sweet swing, a sweet backhand swing early on, and there's no YouTube. You don't get to just screen cap someone's throw and study it over and over and over again like the kids can do now. How did you learn technique back then as you were coming up?
So, as I said, the Masters Cup was always the big week because Stevie came in. Steve Rico, who is about 6-7 years older than I am, when I was 10, let's just say he was 18, he was already a star, you know, and he had this crazy strong throw. Climo was like more smooth. The Listmans, they weren't that impressive from an athletic perspective, but they can make putts. Like, I just studied them over and over and over and over again. And actually, in those early days, I got introduced to Crazy John Brooks. Mm-hmm. And Crazy had come into town to play the Masters Cup. Crazy was one of those guys that would get to know the locals pretty well. And my dad, he got to know my dad, and so then I got to meet him, and he would kind of teach me some putting routines, some things like that. So I learned a lot that week. But week in and week out, it was really the local pros from DeLaveaga that would help me train. Hey, Nathan, try this. Whether it was Marty teaching me how to throw up shots or Jim Hagan showing me how to throw big backhand tee shots. They were always working with me. And we always did it. There was no such thing as field work. It was just play. Let's just go out and play. And how can you get better? And how can you do those kinds of things? So it was a lot of support, but also some self-teachings, and then just a lot of alone time just doing it, just practicing in the backyard. We did putt a lot, but when we played, we just played, and you became an expert at DeLaveaga. That was always a big problem too. You'd be like, I'm a great player at DeLaveaga.
Yep.
Yeah, so and that going out to the Midwest and playing in those world championships, it made me realize there's other types of golf, right? Where at DeLaveaga, you learn to slide it up to the pin. In Kansas City, or in Wisconsin for that matter, you got to land it at the pin. Mm-hmm. The grass stops it. So you can't slide it up 30 short because then you got to make a 30-foot putt. So all those things started to progress. But yeah, I think it was a lot of just watching, trying to copy, you know. I remember when I first saw Ron Russell putt, he had a very strange putt. I started copying it, started making a bunch of putts. And then that all evolved actually into the Anheuser putt.
That's where it came from.
Yeah, if you see videos of like the 05, 07 Worlds, and really any time from about 05 till about 2010-ish, it was all this turnover putt. And that started with the Ron Russell and then I started to go straight on, and it just kind of all progresses. So yeah, it was nobody, not one person said, do it this way exactly. Yeah. They just said, watch me do it, and then you figure it out.
So 1999, you win Junior Worlds.
Yep.
The year after, you played Pro Worlds. You never played an amateur world championship.
Yeah.
And that was Climo's last win of his big streak. He went, I believe, 91 to 2000 or something like that. And you played the 2000 Worlds. I believe it was in Ann Arbor.
Yep.
Talk about that.
The day I won that Junior Worlds, in my mind, I was now pro. Mm-hmm. My dad kind of forced me to play that 2000 Masters Cup because, again, it was split. There was an AM weekend and a pro weekend. And I did win, which was great. And actually, the 1999 Masters Cup, I hope I have these years. I think I do. But 99, I was playing AM2. And after the first round, my score was better than the leader of AM1. So Tom Schott's like, well, we're going to bump you during the tournament to AM1.
What?
Yeah. And everybody, it was almost like a meeting of the minds in Santa Cruz. Tommy wanted to do it, but everybody else was like, no, just let Nathan, like, ride this out, get this win. You know, they figured I was going to win. Wasn't it for sure, but you know, I was leading by a significant amount at that point. So fast forward 2000, I win that one. I get that trophy. So now I've won AM2 Masters Cup, AM1 Masters Cup. The only one left is to win Pro. And spoiler alert, I never did win the Masters Cup in the open division. But the next weekend I did turn pro. I did cash in that tournament, and it was kind of cool. That round, the final round, I played with, I think it was Larry Leonard, Joel Kelly, and Jim Oates, who were 3 of the 4 from the previous year's Masters Worlds final in Rochester.
Wow.
So it was really cool to just play with like guys that were that established. And I remember making this huge, we started on hole 5, I think, and I made this huge putt on hole 6, and I think I ended up beating a couple of them, but anyways, I cashed. So now I'm pro. And funny enough, when I did cash, there was also another meeting of the minds in the middle of the parking lot, and it was like, so Nate, you gonna take the money? And I'm like, I don't know, you know, AM Worlds, this and that. And I'll never forget, Marty Hapner says, you know, Nate, you're gonna be a pro anyways, dude. And it was like $400. You know, I'm 16.
That's big money back then.
I was just a kid still. And he's like, you're gonna be pro anyways, just take it. And so I took it. And so now I'm a pro. So now I got all this going on. Now I gotta get to Pro Worlds, because that's where you gotta be if you wanna be at the best. So went down the route of sponsorship, went back to a lot of the people that had, you know, given me some money the year before. I'm going to Pro Worlds in Michigan. Couldn't afford the flight. So I'm 15, so I can't drive. Couldn't afford the flight, so we had to rent a car. My dad and I drove in a rental car from Santa Cruz, California to Detroit, Michigan to play the Worlds. Along the way, the car overheated. It was like a rental car, but they didn't have enough antifreeze in it, so my dad had to put antifreeze. That was in Nevada. Kept going. We hit thunderstorms in Nebraska. We slept in a rest area just in the car with all the windows rolled down in Iowa. It was so hot and humid. But we get there. We get there, man. And we didn't even have a hotel. We didn't know where we were going to stay. And we went to the Red Roof Inn, got a room. Okay, so now we got a room. And Worlds is coming up. Practice rounds are going great. Feeling good. Tournament's about to start. Got to be there the first round. Oversleep. Don't set the alarm. My dad wakes up. He's like, oh my God, Nathan, we're going to miss your round. And we still had to drive like across town to get to the course. And it was shotgun, right? It wasn't tee times. So we get in the car, racing. We pull into the parking lot. And it was like, where am I at? And it's like, 2 minutes. And I bolt across this field, get to my group. Somehow they were like, Nathan, you're on hole 12 or whatever. So I get there. I'm just not mentally there. I was like, but I played okay. But, you know, Chris Brophy was, this was like, I think we were on the B pool, and Chris Brophy shot a 12 on that round, and I shot like a 2. So I'm like, okay, this is over. Like, this is done. Play the whole Worlds, ended up missing the semifinals, which turns out was the only semis that I would ever miss as a pro. But it was really cool, actually. The Worlds was so big, over 300 competitors. I think they ended up going into the D pool for the pro men. I still cashed, but I didn't have to play the semifinal. I finished like 90-something, I think, or 80, high 80s, low 90s, somewhere in there. Still cashed, which was cool. So now I have my cash streak at Worlds going. And I didn't have to play the final round, or the semis, which is the Saturday morning in those days. So I saw Stevie. I said, Stevie, can I caddy for you? And he was like, yeah, hell yeah, bro. Like, yeah, you can caddy for me, kid. Like, yeah, come on. He ended up playing with Scott Stokely. And these guys are larger than life to me at this time. Legends, right? I had known Scott since, Scott actually won the very first Masters Cup that I spectated. And at this time, Scott was on a tremendous run. He had taken second place like 2 or 3 times in a row at Worlds. And, you know, you're thinking, boy, maybe he's going to win this one. But they were on the chase card. And so we get to the first tee. I'm just carrying Stevie's bag, not saying a thing. And I remember Scott saying this very vividly. He's like, hey, guys, I'm not going to be saying nothing to any of you today. I'm focused on the task at hand. I want to make the finals. And Stevie's like, yeah, whatever, man. You know, Stevie kind of, you know, he wasn't all about that. But it was really cool to like hear how focused he was going to be. He was professional in the way that he delivered that comment. And he did. He focused. And he ended up shooting a 12. I still think he missed the finals that year. But that was my first taste of like what level of focus and commitment it's going to take to become a world champion. That was like, because that was the first Pro Worlds I'd ever seen now. And then the finals happened. It was really cool. Kenny ended up going on a win. It was really cool finals. I think it was Barry, Jesper Lundmark, like a young Jesper coming over from Sweden, Rick Vokes, who could have been playing in the like Grandmasters. He was in his 50s, I think. And then Kenny. And Kenny was he was so smooth, so dominant. And so yeah, that was my first Worlds experience. Got in the car the next day, drove all the way back. My dad was so exhausted when we hit the Great Salt Lake, the flats. As you're heading on 80, go through the flats, and then you hit Nevada. He's like, look, kid, you're driving. I didn't have a driver's license. I was 15 years old. I'm barely 15 at that. He's like, you're driving. He's like, just keep it straight. So we pulled off on like a deserted exit, got back on the highway, and just for 4 hours, man, I just kept that sucker straight and just kept it in the slow lane, but, you know, learned how to set the cruise control and everything, and my dad just fell asleep. Yeah, so that was my first driving experience, was in the, you know, Utah, Nevada, coming home from the Worlds.
I can't even believe that.
You know, my whole life was taught through disc golf experiences, whether it was driving or, you know, anything. Yeah. It was these guys, they all taught me everything. I had like my dad, but I also had like 20 or 30 dads, or maybe brothers or uncles that were all just teaching me little things. But yeah, my dad let me drive that time. It was scary.
I bet it was scary.
Yeah.
Zoom out.
Yep.
It feels like disc golf is such an intense focus in your life throughout your whole childhood, adolescence, but you still have to go to school.
Yeah.
You still have to do things outside of disc golf because that's what you do as a kid. What was life outside of disc golf like for you moving into high school? I know you played basketball. I know you went on to go to, I believe you went to college. Talk about all of that outside of disc golf.
When I got into high school, that was when baseball started to kind of fade, soccer had faded, disc golf was the main body of everything, but basketball really became a huge love of mine. And I was very fortunate to have a great coach in high school, actually two coaches, Coach Curtis and Coach Walters. And those 4 years changed me forever. I went into that being suspended from school, just being this kind of troublemaker kind of person, to now all of a sudden having a much higher respect for adults and the way that adults make decisions. I'll never forget in basketball practice one day, we're doing practice and we're running a play and I screw it up and Coach Walters blows a whistle. Nathan, well, they call me Doss. Doss, what are you doing? Why can't you run this play? I'm like, Coach, sorry, Coach. And he just stops the whole practice in front of everybody. He goes, you know, Nate, if you worked at McDonald's and you were just the fry guy, you just fried fries, and you kept burning those fries, you would be fired. You would be let go. If you can't do the job that you're asked to do, you're not going to be able to do it. And that was, I'll never forget that, because I thought at that moment, he's absolutely right. If I don't know these plays and I can't run this play exactly right, I'm not going to succeed. If you're at a job and you don't do it right, you're not going to succeed. And that actually was a huge changing point in my life. That was like young, I was a sophomore. And from then on, I memorized the play. I could run every play from point guard to center. Every position, I could do it. And so I started getting that mentality. And I'll never forget those 4 years of basketball. There were some of my 4 years of I don't know, I wouldn't trade it for anything. honestly, for my Worlds or I would not trade those 4 years of basketball because you can't get those back. You know, there's that time when you're in high school and everybody cares what's going on. Like me and you could go shoot hoops and we could play horse or whatever, and we're going to care. But it's not like having refs and the other coaches and everything like that. Eventually that all goes away. And so I'll never forget those 4 years. And actually when I graduated high school, Coach Walters called me up and said, hey, do you want to come back and coach? Like I need another assistant. So I actually went back and coached basketball at my high school for 8 years.
Really?
Yeah, every single, and it's perfect. Basketball lines up exactly opposite with disc golf, right? So as soon as basketball's over, it's like mid-Feb, early March, depending on how far you make it, disc golf is firing up. When it comes back around in October, you know, USDGC happens, and then the season's over, and play a couple more turns, basketball's firing right back at the beginning of November. So it worked out really, really well. So all through all these stories of disc golf, I was still coaching basketball. When I was in high school, still playing basketball. And my other thing that I was really good at was computers. So my dad early on, he had like gotten a computer, but we had to put it together. Like, you know, CPU and fans and hard drive and plug everything in. And I did that at probably like 15. So I started getting kind of into that. And when I got into college, that's what I went to college for, was like networking and all this stuff. And by the time I even got into college, I knew everything because I just loved it. I was obsessed with it. And I ended up getting a job. Like, I was 19 and I got a job. And it was this kind of funny job where I was like running this mail server at this business. I turned 20, I won Worlds, come back, and I'm like, yeah, hey, I'm the world champion now. And they were like, what? Yeah, the server's messing up. Can you fix it? Like, that's how it was. Like, I would be at disc golf or I was back home. That was kind of like those two worlds were completely separated. So it was kind of cool.
Let's talk about that time leading up to the World Championship. That's actually perfect. I did some looking. Your generation of players in the MPO division, or I guess across the board in disc golf, was in a time when the manufacturers were almost in a space race with each other. It felt like discs were coming out one after the next, after the next, after the next. But for you, half your bag, which stayed with you for pretty much your whole career, came out in 2002.
Exactly.
The Challenger, the Wasp, the Predator, all of those came out in the same year.
Yes.
And if people have watched you play, those are almost the only discs that you throw. I mean, there are some newer ones that came out, but talk about that period of time when discs were getting faster and faster and faster, and it seems like every company was trying to one-up each other. And mainly it was Discraft and Innova, correct?
Yeah, at those days it was just those two companies. Lightning was around, and there might have been some other like offshoots, but before the patent ran out, really, Innova and Discraft were the only ones that were really kind of able to afford it, right? Innova owned the patent. Discraft was paying to utilize that patent as well. Okay. So, but they were both innovating, right? So Discraft would innovate, Innova would then add on to that, and then Discraft would do it again. And it was kind of like, there was the early Innova discs, then there was the Cyclone stuff, then there was the T-Bird and Eagle stuff, and then there started to be the MRVs and the MRXs and the XLs and X2s of the world. And then right around 2003 there was a big push. See, Cam Todd had left. Cam Todd won the Worlds in 2001. He was playing for Innova. He then left Innova and moved to Discraft. He was like the first person to make the big move in the off season. But one of the things that came out of that, and there's a lot of story to that. One of the things that came out of that was he said, you got to make me an AVR. I'm not going to do it unless you make me something similar to the AVR. That's where the Challenger came from, right? Putters, there's not a lot of technology you can do, but it's this, edge with the bead, how big's the bead, blah, 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 right? So they make the Challenger. And that, I absolutely loved the Challenger. And Cam always loved these white ones and everything, and they were hard to get and stuff like that. But that was like one of the big paramount shifts is like now it wasn't just the magnet for Discraft. Now they had the Challengers. Now they had 2 putters kind of thing. And then in 2003, Stevie Rico pushed Discraft to make the Pred. And that was an overstable, like X2-esque, but a little bit faster and stuff like that. And then a couple years later, that's when Valkyries and like the Force, Avengers, discs like that started to come out. So it was tough. Like as a player, I was so just, I'd beat them in, I wouldn't lose them. If I lost a disc, it was like it took weeks to recover. So like I had to not lose them at a real premium. But you know, you were always getting new discs, trying new stuff, but I would always revert back to things that I could just trust, right? So, and how it felt in my hand. You know, a wider rim is a different feel versus a more shallow rim, things like that. And so, yeah, it's a hard time, man. When things are just coming out and everybody's starting to throw farther, you got to keep up, but yet you don't want to lose the accuracy. But luckily, I was young, so I could adapt really, really quickly.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask about this because to start in 05, when you won your world title, the Wraith had come out,
right?
But the Surge had not come out yet.
No.
So, and I think that technology-wise was a big deal, a disc like the Wraith. I don't think any other company had anything close to that. Talk about the 05 Worlds in general, but then also, did the Innova players there have the leg up? Well, like, was there a lot of talk about that?
Yeah, there was always talk about the disc. And for the longest time, Innova, it seemed like the Innova guys always had a leg up for whatever reason. But I always, you know, Discraft was always pretty good at consistency. Like their discs were made, you know, in Michigan, indoors, kind of things were pretty consistent. So we kind of had that going for us. But at that Worlds in 2005, we had the Avenger. So I was actually throwing a proto-Avenger. They hadn't really come out with like a logo yet, or maybe they did, but the one I got, of course, was the one I liked. Yep. So, and I could bomb that thing. Like that was actually what kept me close to Kenny and Barry and those guys at that time was the Avenger. And so I had that one disc and I threw that thing because I was still throwing Cyclones and XLs as well. But that Avenger definitely, I had a leg up there.
In 05, you win, and I'd love for you to tell kind of the story of your first Worlds. But first, you look at second place, that guy is still out here. Matt Oram is still playing. I believe he might even be top 10 on tour still, and he was wearing the Yankees jersey, and everyone talks about it. I know you've brought it up a few times. Oh, yeah. What were your impressions of him playing with him that week?
Well, MattyO, I never really played with him until the finals. Like he surged late. So I never really had a chance to play with Matt until that finals. But he, you know, Matty, we look at him now and he's this developed person, but in those days, I mean, he was 16 or 17. He was a kid, you know, and kind of quiet, but man, what a player. You know, lanky, and he could bomb the disc too. And he would make some good putts here and there. But I'll say this. 05 was obviously life-changing. I was so hyper-focused. The MattyO, the one story I can tell you about MattyO is we got to this one long hole in the final 9. I think it was like the 5th hole of the final 9 holes. Maybe the 4th or 5th. And it was this long downhill hole that then bent left and played along this creek. And then the pin was back there. I think it was a par 5. And I think Brian Schweberger goes, $50 to anybody that threes this hole, right? And somebody goes, I'll put another 50 on it. I'll put another 20 on it. I'll put another, this is all like on the tee during the finals of Worlds. And I'm just sitting to the side, just like, I'm not paying attention. I'm like, oh my God, I'm playing this for par. Because it would, you know, you could bogey it real quick, right?
$500 for a 4 on this hole. $500 for a 4 on this hole.
So they get all this money and they throw it down on the tee pad. And we all start playing, and MattyO takes the aggressive line left. I mean, he just bombs this thing down the hill, gets all the way down, kind of bends around the corner, throws this killer second shot, makes the putt, gets the money. The crowd just goes insane. And we've only got 3 holes left, and I have to hang on. Because, oh, by the way, the other 2 people in the finals, Barry and Kenny. The defending 2-time champion in Barry Schultz, who had won the previous 2 years, and at the time, the 11-time world champion. So I'm more focused on them versus MattyO. But MattyO put on one heck of a show, and I think for the people that were there, that was a special moment.
Oh, yeah.
Getting that 3 from Matty, he gets the money, and now it was about this 20-year-old kid going on and winning his first real tournament. You know, when I won that Worlds, I had never won anything bigger than a B tier. Now, it's not like I had played a lot of A tiers, but
still.
I had, and here's the thing. Heading into that Worlds, I had taken second place to Ken, Barry, Ron Russell, Cam Todd, and I think Jeff Lissaman. All 5 of them, who at the time were, you know, just the biggest names, I had taken second place to in A tiers and B tiers. So I had had that experience of battling, but I just hadn't got across the finish line. Just happened to be that I got across the finish line for the first time at a world championship.
2005 world champion, Nate Doss.
How did life change for you after that moment? Clearly, you didn't go full-time, I believe, until 2010. You were still working your IT job.
Yep.
So what happens when you win that world title, career-wise?
I think there's 2 things that can happen when you win what we would call the big one, and really in any sport. Depends on where you are in your career. I was on this upswing. So for me, it was kind of like, hey, feeling pretty good, but man, I've been getting beaten out by all the bests. I got so many second places. And the stats you could even bring up, it's kind of a ridiculous number. I have double the amount of second places than I do wins in my career. Just imagine I had just a third more wins. But anyways, that's another story for another day. I hadn't happened, but as soon as that happened, it was like this peak started happening where there was the belief now. Mm-hmm. Now you know it can happen. And now it's a possibility. Now it's not just a theoretical. It's actually, boy, I have the trophy. Every tournament I played after that day was never the same. I had a completely different confidence that I knew I could win going into the final round. I knew I could win from the lead. And I'm the type of player, now that my career is basically over, I always won from the front. Early rounds I would play well, and then I would just wear people out. That's how I usually won. All my worlds were won by more than 1 stroke. Even the tight one in 07 against Marcus, I still ended up winning by 2 or 3 shots. But nothing was ever the same after that day from a competitive perspective because there was a belief. When you look at the flip side and you start, say you win the big one near the end, and you're kind of like, you've already done this, and then it's almost like a relief. For me, there was no relief. For me, it was just like, boom, now you got a full tank of gas, let's go. And so it was, the next week I was playing, back in California, and I didn't win, but I feel like I could win. Now I'm on the lead card more. Now you get that feeling of, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so that day was what that was all about. And, just realizing like, oh my God, I'm a world champion now. Because I went from kind of everybody just being like, yes, this kid's pretty good. Like people knew of Nate Doss and things like that. But I was no Felberg or Avery or, Al Shack or Barry Schultz or, any of those guys. I was just this potential. Mm-hmm. But after that moment, it was like, boom, next year I'm going to Japan, I'm going to Europe, I'm traveling, I'm flying in and out. So yeah, it was a big difference.
Well, funny you mentioned that because I want to get into you going to Japan and Europe. But first, you win, and then I believe Discraft got you out to the Am Worlds that year.
Yep.
I heard a story from a couple different sources of some pretty interesting stuff. You did a signing.
Yep.
At the Am Worlds, and in that line, waiting to get the signature on those little minis, was Nate Sexton, Paul Ulibarri, and Paul McBeth. And I believe Paul and Paul were together.
Yep.
Do you remember this?
100%.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so kind of a cool story. If you go onto YouTube and you watch at the time it was a VHS. Maybe it was a DVD, I don't know. Either way, the coverage of that final 9, you'll see Terry Miller, a young Terry Miller, come in and hand me a box. And there was 13 magnets in there with a full color, Discraft full color, Nate Doss 2005 world champ. They sent them to Terry 2 days earlier when I was like near the lead and said, Terry, if he doesn't win, destroy these. If he does, hand them to him on the final hole.
What?
Yeah, so you'll see Terry come in, I look in the box, I rip it out, I look at it, and then I go, yeah, and that's kind of like the end of the video, right? And it's this, oh my God, how did Discraft even think of doing this? So I have 13 of these. So then they say, hey, we want you to go out to Flagstaff and we want you to do a signing because AM Worlds is like in 10 days. So now my like whirlwind of traveling begins. I fly home, I do everything at home. A couple days later, I fly to Arizona, I take a bus up to Flagstaff, I get there. Well, now that same logo, they had put on mini Ultra Stars. So they had like, it was like a little bit of a bigger mini, but it was full color. And they had like 200 of them. So it's okay, Nate Doss is gonna be at the Fly Mart, this table, blah, blah, blah. So I'm signing them, and there's just like these kids that are just like, and I'm a kid. But they just, hey, can I have one? Can I have another one? I'm like, no, I can't. I can only give like one out to each person. Turns out that was you. I don't remember Sexton, but it was Yulee and McBeth. And they kept asking me for like another one. I'm like, I can't. There's only 200 of them. They told me I can't give out more. So, I'll say this. I'm so fortunate in disc golf of when I started. So 1992, a long time ago, but I'm young. I'm 6 years old. I have, over my career, been fortunate to play with Sam Ferentz, John Earhart, Ken Climo, Jeff Listman, Harold Hampton, Steve Rico, Barry Schultz, Ron Russell, Cam Todd, Avery Jenkins, Felberg, McCabe. Then fast forward, a young Yulee, a young McBeth. I was in the RV in Columbus when we told Ricky to take cash, Ricky Wysocki. And now I'm commentating on guys that I never even had the chance to play with, a Calvin Heinberg. Calvin was playing tournaments when I was playing, but he was always like 5th, 6th, 8th card. I was near the top. And so I've been able to watch this progression of all these people. And it is really just an honor to like go back and remember all those moments and all these world champions, all these different people. But I've been able to like stand with those giants for all these years. It's pretty cool.
You played with the young Paul McBeth. He rose up pretty quick, and I remember, I forget exactly where the picture was taken. Maybe it was Masters Cup. It was like you, Paul, Barry, somebody else. And there was an article written about Paul, about how he had this crazy arm speed and this crazy fast putt. I've been told by people, Discraft was one of them, saying that you had a pretty good gauge on talent, like who you thought was going to be good, who you thought had the work ethic to be good. When you first played with Paul, did you think something special was going to come out of him?
Yes. In fact, the joke on tour was we called McBeth, and there was a lot of good talent coming in at that time. I think of it like a Devin Owens, young left-handed player, Yulee, some guys that had kind of committed to traveling. But McBeth was different in the sense, and this is not to say anything about those other guys, but just talking about Paul here. He was so committed to the aggressive play. And with the joke on tour, we called him the Ferrari because it was all gas and no brake. There was no brake. He was gonna go for it no matter what. If it meant taking an 8 or if it meant taking a 2, he was going for it. And we always said, when this kid stops bogeying, it's over. Like, we're done.
Really?
Yeah, like he is going to be that kid because the work ethic, his athletic ability, his distance. I mean, he was exceptional distance when he was young, and we just knew that was coming. And he started winning Memorial, this, that. He kind of started dabbling, and 2011 Worlds came around, and boy, I dodged a bullet there. He gets poison oak really bad, and he got it really bad at that Worlds. I think had he not gotten poison oak, I think McBeth wins that Worlds, and my life is certainly different, and everybody's life is certainly different if he starts winning an 11 versus 12. And I can be honest about that now. Did I think I would go and win in my hometown, on my home courses? I certainly hope so. And it was an odd year, and I'm 5, 7, and 11. I like to win the Worlds in odd years. But, I mean, I did dodge a bullet there big time. But then as soon as 2012 came around, by the time we even got to Worlds a year later, I mean, he was the favorite.
You knew.
I was not even the favorite. I mean, I hoped to do good. I did finish in the top 10. I'd missed out the finals that year, which I was super bummed about, because I had not followed up a Worlds win without making the finals the very next year. So for a 4-year span, 5 to 8, I went first, second. And so I was definitely disappointed, but when you really step back now and you look at it, you're like, okay, this was now the handing of the baton by all of us, by any world champion, any great champion. It was like, okay, all right, dude, it's your turn now. And he took it from here to there, whether it was because of his age, because of YouTube, social, whatever it was, he was the next person to take it.
You talk to that generation of player that came just after your prime, and they say a very similar thing about playing with you. They say that you were one of the more intimidating people that they've played with. Did you intend to intimidate people when you were on the course, or is that just how you carried yourself athletically?
I did not intend. I've never intended to intimidate anybody in my life. As a human being, I'm pretty a friendly person. But the one thing I told myself when I was a young kid, and I think it was 99 when I did win Worlds. I thought, Junior Worlds, I thought, I need to leave this game better than I found it. That is now, that is going to be my only goal. That's my only goal. And, that's why I wore the collar shirt. I tried to be professional. I tried to say the right things. And so that was my only goal. Winning was sort of ancillary to being professional and trying to raise things up, because we always say it still to this day, wait 10 years. Can you imagine what disc golf's going to be like in 10 years? We were saying that in the 90s. 92, can you imagine 02? 02, could you imagine 12? 12, could you imagine 22? And look at what it's done. But that's because we as players have to pass on that knowledge. You can't hold that knowledge back. I always wanted to pass on the professionalism, the intensity. You can be as intense as you want, but when that final putt drops, you have to shed all that, and you got to shake their hand. You got to be happy for them, because that's how they're going to learn, And I always wanted to teach intensity, because I'm, as an athlete, learning from playing basketball, that story I told about the fries, I have to be the best. And if you don't, you're going to get fired. And so that was always the way that I thought about it. But I've never purposefully tried to intimidate anybody, ever. Now, has that happened? Sounds like it has. But I never did that on purpose. I always just wanted to teach that intensity, but also a fairness and a professionalism to your fellow player.
Well, and I want to add to this, because the other words that I heard when I talked to people about playing with you or working with you was strict, disciplined, routine, animal. Do you feel like that was something you intended to do? Were you trying to force yourself to be disciplined in that regard?
100%. I mean, when you hear me commentate, and still to this day, my pride and joy is commentating those majors. Because while now the Pro Tour has done such a good job at making week in and week out kind of a big deal. Mm-hmm. In our day, they were a big deal, the NTs, but it was about Worlds. It was about the USDGC. I spent at the first part of the year prepping for the Masters Cup, Worlds, and the USDGC. Those are the three things, those are the only things I cared about. And so when I got into those moments, Masters Cup, I blanked everything out. There was no friends. This is my hometown, no friends. I did the same thing every day. I slept on the same side of my body. I ate the same food. I got up at the same time. Everything was this routine because it had been a proven thing for me. But you're playing a tournament that takes 4 or 5 days. You better be able to ignore all this outside blurriness and stay focused on what's right in front of you. And so for me, that was always what it was. Now, I'm a guy, when people know me off the course, I mean, I'm having fun.
Yeah.
I'm, having as much fun as anybody can have, but when I got onto the course, everything changed. I wasn't just this like dopey kind of, fun-loving dude. I like to smile on the course as well and have a good time, but in those times, there was a job to do.
Well, I want to talk about that job too, because I have been told by many people that you are one of the more regimented pro players that they'd ever played with. But still, not until 2010, you were working an IT job and balancing that with being a professional disc golfer who was as regimented as you were. What were the talks at the time, not even just about you, but about being a full-time disc golfer? Was that something that many people in that community aspired to do?
Yes. I mean, at the time, definitely Dave, Avery, Val, several others, Jay and Dez, they were committed. That's all they did. They just played disc golf. And from 2005 to 2010, that 5-year stretch, I did have a full-time back in California. I still put in a ton of field work and prep. And I think my best season was 2008. I finished second in Worlds. I won the USDGC. I think my worst finish was like a 5th. I only played 13 tournaments, and I believe 11 of them were out of the state of California. I found a way to be able to prep at home, travel, and still put myself in position to win week in and week out. But the going and becoming a full-time player, that was always the dream. And there was a lot going on in my personal life to where Val and I had started, we were now an item. And that's what she was going to go do. Come Memorial, they're leaving. They'll be back in May for the Masters Cup, but then they're leaving again. How can I continue this relationship if I'm not there? If I'm not there putting in that time, we're not spending time together, how can we live this long distance thing? And for Val, I don't think it was going to work for her either. So it was kind of like a put up or shut up kind of situation. I was making good money in Cali, but my life was making this big change. So I actually retired on February 10th of 2010 from my IT job. 3 months earlier, I told my boss, hey, I'm retiring. I'm going to go. I have a lot more responsibilities now. I can go and play all these tournaments, this and that. And he said, man, well it sucks to lose you, but he was always supportive of me. But going full-time was a whole new learning curve.
That's scary.
It's a whole new learning curve. Because remember what I just explained. It was home, 8 hours a day, 8 to 10 hour work days, 40, 50 hour work weeks, practicing when I couldn't, flying, playing, coming back. I would be at work the very next day. It was this constant, never a moment to just sit there and go, never. Once you're on tour, you got a lot of that. A lot of driving, a lot of, you played your one practice round for the day. Now what am I going to do for the other 8 hours of the day, right? And my mind, I am this go, 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 go. How many things can I do at once? Kind of ADD personality. So there was a big learning curve. And if you really look at a wins-loss perspective, after 2010, that really drifted downward. I did have less wins, I think, after I went full-time than I did before, but consistency was still really there. A lot of finals, a lot of lead cards, a lot of top fives, a lot of second places, but those wins didn't come, and I think some of that was a little bit of me still trying to get my feet under me. And by the time I did, my career, I had turned 30, and things were just, I was planning the next phase of my life.
Yeah. And I guess this spans before you went full-time and after, but I have to ask about it. You started going over to Europe. You went to Japan to play disc golf.
Yep.
I heard the old Japan Opens were some of the coolest disc golf tournaments that people had ever played. Talk to me about those experiences back then, going over to Europe and playing in Scandinavia, going to Japan, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I am so lucky to have been able to do that. And actually, Discraft has a big portion of that as well. Without them, it would not have been possible. When I met with Jim Kenner, the owner of Discraft, a couple of weeks after Worlds in 05, he said, "What's the one thing you want?" I said, "I don't know." He's like, you gotta want something." I'm like, "Well, it'd be cool to have like a disc with my name on it." He's like, "Okay, we can do that." So we did the Avenger. And then I said, "You know, I don't ever want to miss a major championship for the rest of my career." He's like, "Done." Discraft paid for me to go to every major for the rest of my career until 2018. They paid hotel, flight, whatever, car. So without them, where would I be? Now, of course, I don't have a $10 million contract, which is what we see nowadays, but that wasn't available at that time. So to me, getting Jim to commit to that was like winning the lotto. Because now, come the next year, I'm going to Japan, man. That's a major. And I'm flying over there, and I'm the world champ, you know? And then a couple of months later, I'm going to Europe, and we went, I mean, not to skip over Japan. Japan was the most eye-opening experience of my life. It was the first 10-hour trip I'd ever taken, the first time I ever left the country. I was still so stuck in my ways of my little world in California. I'm not even 21. Or barely, I just turned 21 when we traveled out there in June. And so I don't even know what's going on. I'm just kind of along for the ride. The jet lag is horrible. I'm throwing 150 discs. But the Japanese people and the excitement was so much fun. And I was there as the world champion. So everybody wants my autograph. You know, of course everybody wants to see Kenny and Stevie and Avery, you know, but I'm the world champ. So I get to be involved with everything. So I started to get to like learn how they handled it. See, this is them passing on their knowledge to me. So now I see how Ken handles a crowd and how Avery handles a crowd and Barry and whomever else, Sam Farron's. Like because I've won this Worlds and I have this title on my name, I get to be with them. I'm not just this young guy that's just kind of watching from the edge. I'm inside it. And so that was what an amazing learning curve in Japan. Had a great time there. Fast forward, we went to Europe. We did a fun thing called the Lipton Cup. And Lipton, which is a Dutch company from the Netherlands, they wanted to run a Team Netherlands versus a Team USA, and they called it the Lipton Cup. Nice. And they set up like a course in this beautiful park in Rotterdam, and we played an 18-hole match play thing. We were on TV, and the American team was Ken, Avery, Felberg, me, Val, Burl, like the best players of the best, and then we were playing the team from the Netherlands. All amazing people. We had a fantastic time, but the U.S., we won that match. And needless to say, Lipton didn't ever have us back. But it was an amazing experience because now I'm in a country, I don't speak the language. We're being interviewed by the television crews, and we're on their local TV. We're taking pictures with all these people, like with all Lipton stuff and everything. And then we fly up to Finland, and we play the very first ever European Open. We play the very first ever President's Cup. We meet UC, or at least I did, for the first time. And we saw the excitement there and the level of professionalism, because they all looked at the USDGC as the gold standard because it was in the same place every year and all that. And UC really brought that to Finland. And so that was an amazing experience as well. We were also on their TV. We're staying in the middle of Tampere, just adventuring, you know, but then also getting to play disc golf. So long story short, which the story continues to go on for many, many years, I really grew up traveling with these people, playing the sport, And so I was very fortunate in that sense.
Well, Nate, we can fast forward a little bit more because, again, you've done so much in disc golf. I think we talked about it yesterday. 33 years, I think it is, for you right now being immersed in this game. I have 2 more tournaments that I really want to talk about. And you talked a little bit about it earlier, but you return in 2011 to your home course, to your home city, and you have to play a major there. It's kind of a weird feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it was very difficult. So a couple of things to lead into that. About a year and a half before, in the off season of 2010, Tom Shaw called me up and said, hey, can you bring Val and Avery over to my shop? And I said, sure. So I go over there, and he rolls out this big map of like Pinto Lake. And then he wrote on top of it, World Championship. And he said, hey, we're going to run the Worlds in Santa Cruz. And I swear, Avery, Val, and I said, no, you're not. I didn't want that. I did not want him to run Worlds there. And Tom, defiant, thank God he is defiant as he is, was like, dude, we're doing this. I'm like, the courses are too far apart. I don't know how you're going to do it. But however the Worlds went from a technical standpoint, leave that for another day. But arguably, I did say, hey, I don't want this to happen. Once it was going to happen, we were all in. We were all in, man. We were helping Tom in any way we could. I was pouring tee pads at the Oaks, putting in benches, doing work. Between when we came home from Europe and before the World started, that's all I did. I just worked on courses, practiced a little bit here and there, but it was all about getting the tournament ready. And Val and Avery did the same thing. These are the days when we didn't just offload. We were in there because this tournament needed to succeed, and we wanted to support Tom and Marty and anybody who was a part of that crew. That's what we did. And then all of a sudden the tournament fired up, and I was so nervous, man. The first round we played at the Oaks in Monterey, and boy, I did have a good round, which I was like, oh my God, thank God. Thank God. And there was a kind of a cool feeling with the Oaks because I put the very first basket in the ground at the Oaks with Steady Ed.
Really?
Yeah. So Steady Ed was along with Scott Kesey, who has run DGA for a long time. Scott was a college student at CSUMB. It was a brand new college. It used to be called Fort Ord. It was a military base. They turned it into a college. Scott was like a part of the first graduating class. And his final project was, I want to do a disc golf company. So somehow he got involved with Steady Ed, and they got these holes. I think it was only 6 holes. But we put in the first basket and the tee pad, and we just played like holes 1 and 2, like over and over and over again on that first day. So it was really good memories there. Day 2 was at DeLaveaga. And I'm like, this was going to be the only round we were going to play at DeLaveaga. So Masters Cup, obviously, is 3 rounds there. Worlds was only 1.
That's nerve-wracking.
So I'm like, okay, I got to put together, and I've taken second place at the Masters Cup 5 times. Like, I can put together a good round at DeLaveaga, but this is the one and only opportunity. And I put together a pretty good round and was able to stay at or near the lead. I think I was in the lead. And then we went from Monterey back to Santa Cruz, then all the way back down even further south, down and played Ryan Ranch. And that was a big day for me. I really started to feel like I was dominating the tournament. Made some great shots, still in the lead. And one thing, if you think of California, you think of perfect weather, right? Well, Monterey and Santa Cruz is a subclimate. Most of our clear days in that part of are in the winter, actually, because the air temp and the ocean temp are the same. Come summertime, when the air temp heats up, that's when that fog rolls in. And so I was always prepared. You'll see pictures of me at the World Championship in 2011, like round 3. I'm wearing a jacket and like rain pants. And this is August, but that's because the fog had rolled in. Not a lot of people were prepared for that. And so I think I had a little bit of leg up there. And then the final round was at Pinto, or what was the 4th round at Pinto Lake. Did pretty well there. And then we had to come back out the very next day, play the semifinals out there. And I think the only reason I was able to cross that finish line was because of routine. I wasn't a part of anything. Once that tournament started, I was just to the course, to home. We had dinners with the Brinsters. Brinster was staying with us that year at my parents' house, Avery, Val. We just kept everything the same and just kept it all the same. And the day, I think it's right behind me, the picture of me tapping in that final putt, which will, go down in history as my final World's victory, there was a relief put off my shoulders like you wouldn't believe.
I bet.
Because the weight of the Masters Cup is like 10,000 pound elephants. And up to that point, those were just dragging me down, man, because every Masters Cup would come and go, and I still wouldn't have that title. I still wouldn't be the Masters Cup champion. And I'm not going to ever be it at this point. But when I won that Worlds, there was now I could tell Coach Walters. Because Coach knew I had done all these things, but he never seen me do it. He came out that day.
No way.
My family from my dad's side who lived in the Bay Area, they came out that day. And everybody saw me become world champion in my hometown. I was in the newspapers. And so I thought to myself, Nate, forgive yourself for not winning a Masters Cup because this is a pretty cool moment.
You fried your French fries.
I did it, man. I finally did it.
It must have been awesome to have the coach come out after all those years.
Oh, it was amazing.
I can feel how impactful that one line was from that coach. That's awesome.
Yep, and Coach still comes and visits me to this day, and he's still so proud of everything we've been doing and, our business here and things like that. But, yeah, Coach Walters is a very influential person for me.
Well, Nate, we're not going to do a huge fast forward, but I do want to say, you keep saying disc golf and the narrative for so long at the professional level was, wait 5 years, we're going to explode.
Right.
Wait 5 years, everyone's going to know about disc golf. We're all going to be millionaires. And it obviously doesn't happen like that. But 2015, 2016, we fast forward a little bit, Disc Golf Pro Tour talks start to happen. There's the Disc Golf World Tour that started to happen. Talk about that time. Was it exciting? Were you skeptical at that point of any sort of tour starting up? What was it like for you?
Yeah, I was never skeptical, but I did always feel like we were the guinea pigs. And I knew it. I knew it at that time, and now all these years later, I know for sure that's what we were. Because you had to, whether you were UC, Steve Dodge, or whomever, the PDGA, you needed proof of concept. You needed a way to say, this is what the future should be. And how do you test that out? You test that out on us. Think of the USDGC in the early days, adding rope, OBs everywhere, tee times. We've always been guinea pigs. Nothing's ever been the same. Now it's pretty consistent, I would say, which is kind of cool. That's on the backs of all these people that have come up, including a lot of the players that are still playing. So never skeptical, but I always felt like I was in a whirlwind. Am I on the World Tour? Or am I on the Pro Tour? Or am I playing an NT? Is this an A tier? What scoring system do I have to do?
Yep.
The early days of UC wanting stats, which I think is great. But we had to fill them out ourselves. On a paper scorecard, when we were doing scores, it'd be like, okay, Brian, you got a 4, and that was a circle 2 miss and a C1 make, and you were in the fairway. That was how we scored. Every single hole, and then you'd hand that in, and then people would enter all that stuff. It would go onto the website. It would be used a part of the wrap-up shows, similar to what you guys are doing now. That was all done on paper. Then it was, hey, we're going to give you a phone, like an old cell phone, and you're going to plug it in that way. And so you're just starting to see all this stuff build. And then when Steve Dodge said we're doing the Pro Tour, he set a precedent in the very early part of it and said, we're going to film everything. We're going to have stats for everything. This was when UDisc started to really build up. And at the time, I was like, I just want to play. Just let me play. Like, if you can come up with just whatever system you're going to come up with. But in hindsight, I kind of feel bad about that. I wish I would have been more, I wish I could have seen down the road a little bit more.
But it makes sense.
Yeah, but I just think that the stats, it's also like all the cameramen and the McFlys of the world and the Jomez's of the world. In those days, I just thought, yeah, these are just cameramen. And you had to do whatever you could to just ignore them. You didn't really think of what it was going to become because we were just so in that guinea pig phase. We weren't famous. We didn't have money. We were only playing for $2,000 a weekend. That was for first place. I mean, if you're taking 15th, 20th, 30th, you're not on the road.
A couple $100.
And no sponsor's going to give you money, right? So it's just kind of, you had to come up with a weird way. And again, hindsight, I think of all these things differently. But it's exciting. And what I can say now is I'm really just so excited to see where it's turned out. Giving young people an opportunity to play a sport that they really love, put them on the stage that they deserve to be on. And it's all short-lived. It's all going to go away because next year there's going to be the next group, and 5 years from now it's going to be the next group, and it's going to just keep going. And we're going to all push it forward.
Nate, in 2017, all these years later, you've been doing this for a long time. You win GMC in Vermont, which is iconic property for disc golf, still is, probably always will be.
One of the 4 or 5 heavens in disc golf.
Of course. But then I have to ask you, this is a burning question personally. You win the tournament. It was an awesome win. It was great to see you take that one down. Worlds was there in 2018, and you didn't go.
Yeah.
Was that a tough decision to make, and where was your life going at that time?
Yeah, so it's one of those things where 5 years before I quote-unquote retired, I'd already started to come up with an exit plan. Because I thought, man, by the time I'm 35, like, I need to be doing something else. Not because I didn't love disc golf, but because was I going to have a family? Was I going to have a house? Was I going to have anything? Because I was living this gypsy lifestyle, which was great. But again, I explained, my mind is this revolving door of plans and things I'm doing. And Bevel, the brewery, this is a hobby that I started working on with my father-in-law, Leroy Jenkins, in 2012. Something that I really enjoyed. We'd all talked about it as a family, Avery, everybody included. We want to open a brewery. This is what we're going to do. I'm the brewmaster. So it's kind of like on me. We started doing collaborations. We're doing all these things. So the rubber had already met the road. The train was already on the tracks. That in the middle of 2018, we were going to take some time away to start building the business that we're sitting in right now. So we knew we were going to have to take some time away. I kept telling everybody, that's it. I'm not going to be around. Discraft's like, dude, you're going to play Worlds. You're going to play this. You're going to play that. The week Worlds came up, and you don't just plan a Worlds where you're like, I'm going next week. You got to be months in advance. You got to sign up. You got to get your hotel, travel, blah, 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 blah. So we had already decided we weren't going. But it kind of, everybody is holding off. Hey, you might do it last second. You might do it last second. We decided we weren't going to go. I called Discraft, said, hey, look, like, I'm not going to go. They were devastated. Really? Yeah, because, dude, you're like basically the favorite.
It's their tournament, too.
Yeah, and you're basically the favorite because you just won GMC there. And so the disc golf world, it was a very difficult decision or a very shocking one. For Val and I, it wasn't a big deal at all. Because that day, I was watching Worlds on live scoring from this building. The parking lot was cut up. We were laying water line that week. Like, we needed to do stuff, and this was the next phase of our life.
After that, after your playing days ended at GMC, you were doing some commentary for the Disc Golf Pro Tour, and you're still doing commentary for the Disc Golf Pro Tour, but I don't think people realize what those early broadcasts were like. You and Val and Terry all did so much to keep that going, and I know the tour has not always been puppies and rainbows, in regards to how it went early on. Can you talk about those early days doing the broadcast?
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, Bevel was going to open up sometime in March of 2019. That was going to happen. In January, Steve Dodge called and said, hey, can we talk? I said, sure, what's going on? He's like, hey, I'm making a lot of changes on the live side. I need some commentators. And without getting into the weeds there, we get to the memorial. It's just Val and I. there's no other commentators. There's cameramen in Arizona. There's Johnny V in Milwaukee, and there's Val and I in a booth in my old house here in Bend. And we got a sheet from Target behind us, and there's no training, but there's a thing sitting in the back of Val and I's mind that if we don't do this, who else will? Now, there was Terry and Jamie, and there was several other people that could have done it, but who's going to be the color? Who's going to be the person that can put you in that?
Player, yeah.
Who's going to do that? That's us. And Val and I were committed to it. And we got a lot of press from the sheet, and we took it down after the first day. But then it was just Val and I learning. And these are the days we didn't have instant replay. We had to go to commercial between tee off and putting every hole. But it was, let's just do it. Let's just get it done. Steve asked us to do it. Everything else had fallen apart. We're going to be there for Steve. Steve had put us up in his house so many times out in Maple Hill. The sport had done so much for us. We weren't going to be playing. We're doing Bevel. We could do the weekends of commentary. So that first season, Tournament 2, which I think was Waco, Jeff Spring flew in because I told Steve, I said, hey, we need a host. I'm like, who? So with my own flyer miles, I flew Jeff Spring from Vermont to Bend, and he hosted the second show we ever did. And he did a really good job and, everything like that, but there was still a lot of turmoil, and we couldn't get a host. So Val and I, we did women in the morning, men in the afternoon, 8 hours a day, both of us in the booth. During the women's shows, I was the host. During the men's shows, she was the host. Did that entire season for no money.
Nothing.
No money. Steve Dodge sent us a pizza every single day that we commentated. I finally called Steve. I'm like, I can't eat this much pizza, dude. I can't.
Change it up.
Can you send me a sub from Subway or something? But Steve loves his pizza out there in Massachusetts. But it was a hard time. It was a lot of work, a lot of sleepless nights. I mean, the tournament would be done on Sunday. I'd be right back here in the morning. We would commentate, and then we'd have to come bartend. It was just a nonstop. But now this is fitting my life because I'm that guy. Go, 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 go. And it kept me connected to the sport. It allowed me to see an entire season of McBeth, of Ricky. Because had I not and just been doing this, I wouldn't have seen any of that. Yeah. Then the next year comes along, and then it's Jamie Thomas. We did get a host. Jamie does that whole season with us. We go through COVID. Jamie's flying up from San Francisco. Then the next year was us and Ian Anderson. And you were starting to jump in there. And so what Val and I take the most pride in with the commentary, are we the best commentators? I don't know. That's hard for me to tell. I can't tell you that answer. But what I do know is disc golf. And what I can talk about is what the players are thinking, what they're going through. And I am going to do my best to do that when I'm in that seat until the day that I just don't. And then the next person that comes in, hopefully they can make it better than I am making it now.
Nate, you have been doing this for so long, and the passion that you still have for disc golf is, I think that's the most inspiring thing. I don't see you as an intimidating guy. I don't think me and you ever got to play in a card together, but it's inspiring that you keep that fire burning. And I know that the people that inspired you, a lot of the old timers from California still have that fire burning. I think Stork just taught a clinic recently back in California, and maybe he does it consistently, but do you have anything final now that you look back on your career? We talk about all this time that you spent committing your whole life to this game. Do you have anything to say just looking back after this conversation?
I am incredibly thankful for everything that I've been given, and it's all been through disc golf. I tell the stories when we do tours at Bevel. Our tanks are named after three people. One of them is Steady Ed, the other one of them is Leroy, and the other one is for Fred Morrison. Fred Morrison, of course, invented the Frisbee, Steady Ed invented the basket, and Leroy was Val's father. And I always tell the story that without these three people, I wouldn't be standing here, you wouldn't be sitting here, none of this would be happening. And my life would certainly not be the same. And so now that I've been away for 6 years, I haven't played a tournament in 6 years, I can look back on it and say, thank you. Just thank you to every single person that I've ever come across. Person that put me up in their house, picked me up at the airport, gave me a ride, gave me a mini when I didn't have it, did anything, sponsored me when I was a 13-year-old kid. Because without all of that, I'm not the man or person that I am today. Yeah. And I'm not perfect. And there's been moments when I've been disappointed in myself because I've let people down with the way I've acted or, done things like that. But at the end of the day, I am proud of that one simple fact, that we took the game and we carried it and handed it to the next person. And when we carried it, we made it a little bigger and we made it a little better and we refined it a little bit, and then the next group takes it. And we're going to, till the day that they don't need us anymore, we're going to be there to help with that, with whatever we can do. Yeah. And so that's the one thing that I look back on. A couple years ago, I was very happy not playing. About 9 months ago, my son was born. And there was something that I felt was missing. Turns out, it was disc golf. At that time, man, I was playing like 4 times a year. So committed to my business, my, other responsibilities that I had. But disc golf was missing. And so in the last 9 months, I've played a little bit more. And I'm actually going to play in another tournament coming up here pretty soon, which I'm just so excited about. Not for the fact that I want to win or anything like that. I've got now a new set of things to go on. 1, complete the tournament. Yep. 2, cash in the tournament. 3, win the tournament. That was never the case. There was only ever one goal. Mm-hmm. That was win the tournament. So I have a much different outlook on things right now. I'm very fortunate that I have the opportunity to come back and play in a couple of events and get back out there with my peers. I've been commenting on them for so long now that I think it would be really cool for me to at least see and play with them. But I'm not there for the limelight. I'm just there to be a part of the field, which is where I spent basically my entire life. So, yeah, Brian, I'm appreciative of everything. I'm thankful for you and everybody that's in this room and really everybody around the disc golfing world. Whether they love me or hate me, just know that I have the sport's best future in mind.
In October, Nate Doss cashed at the United States Disc Golf Championship, his 54th consecutive time cashing at a major. This is the longest active cash streak in MPO major history.